Welcome to Quest Club for November 12th, 2021. This is our last Friday meeting before our 2-week Thanksgiving holiday break. Today we'd like to begin with our invocation to be delivered by Corey Klosterman. Corey?
Good afternoon. I'm going to read a poem of thanks for all of you who've lived lives of giving. It includes volunteering in so many ways, including the volunteering to help educate us throughout the wonderful talks and discussion here at Quest Club. The title is When Giving is All We Have. It's by Alberto Rios, and it begins with an epigraph. One river gives its journey to the next. We give because someone gave to us. We give because nobody gave to us. We give because giving has changed us. We give because giving could have changed us. We have been better for it. We've been wounded by it. Giving has many faces. It's loud and quiet, big and small, diamonded wood nails. Its story is old, the plot worn, and the pages too. But we read this book anyway, over and again. Giving is first and every time, hand to hand. Mine to yours, yours to mine. You gave me blue, and I gave you yellow. Together, we are simple green. You gave me what you did not have, and I gave you what I had to give. Together, we made something greater from the difference. God, thank you for this opportunity to join each other, to understand and to learn this afternoon. We ask that our hearts and minds be open and that you bless this time we have together. Amen.
Fred's paper is titled Georgia O'Keeffe, Was She Misunderstood? Fred is the pastor emeritus of Trinity English Lutheran Church. During his career, he served congregations in Pittsburgh, Toledo, and here in Fort Wayne. In all three places, Fred worked with interfaith and ecumenical groups, serving as president of the Interracial Religious Coalition in Toledo. He also chaired the board of Capital University in Columbus, Ohio for 10 years. Fred is married to his wife, Linda. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary this year. Congratulations. Fred and Linda have 3 children and 4 grandchildren, and Fred has been a member of Quest Club since 2002. Fred?
Before beginning my paper, I want to thank Marilyn Moran Townsend, excuse me, Marilyn. She edited the slides that you will be seeing, slides of Georgia O'Keeffe's work, and the amount of things that you did to make these slides as presentable as they are is just astronomical. Also, she is using her laptop, and she is kind enough to be staffing it. So all your assistance, Marilyn, is deeply appreciated. Thank you. I also want to thank the person who offered this as a topic, and also the committee who selected me to do the research on it. I found it to be extremely educational opportunity for me to learn more about art as well as this artist, Georgia O'Keeffe. And so thank you to the person who offered the subject matter and the committee for choosing me. Georgia O'Keeffe, was she misunderstood? As a pioneer of American modernism, Georgia O'Keeffe could have expected misunderstanding by just being part of a movement that included post-impressionists like Vincent van Gogh, social realists like Diego Rivera, and abstract expressionists like Jackson Pollock. Her imaginary abstracts like Only One, 1959, which is on the screen now, shoreline shells like Shell on Red, painted in 1931, and towering skyscrapers like New York Street with Moon, painted in 1925. These 3 all are oils on canvas. They have an aura about them, as all her paintings have an aura about them, that can cut loose one's imagination and be prey to misunderstanding. But if there has been misunderstanding, what has been misunderstood? Who has misunderstood, and why? Are there prejudices and fears, cultural, artistic, and religious expectations and taboos that contribute to them? And do all understandings have to be the same? Can there be multiple understandings that are acceptable to everyone's artist eyes? Terry Linville says and asks, what does it mean when an art teacher says, use your artist eyes? She goes on to say, quote, it means to zoom in like focusing a camera, notice everything, examine the details, observe the colors, pay attention to the content. And then she concludes, artist eyes concentrate, process, and imagine the visuals you are taking in and send a message to your brain and your soul. O'Keeffe was born on November 15, 1887, on her parents' dairy farm near Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. She had a sharp eye from birth, and when she was only 12, declared that she was going to be an artist. Upon graduating from high school from Chatham Episcopal Institute in Virginia, she went to the Art Institute of Chicago, and then the Art Students League in New York. But it was not until she attended a class taught by Alan Beeman and was introduced to the teachings of Arthur Wesley Dow that her dream to be an artist soared. For then she learned that, as she said, quote, art could be a thing of your own, unquote. And she could do more than mirror what she saw and imitate what others have done, two things that she really did not want to do, wanted to avoid doing. In 1915, when teaching art at Columbia College in South Carolina, she started a series of charcoal abstracts that she called specials. Number 12 is one of them. She sent it with others to Anita Pulitzer in New York, who in early 1916 took them to Alfred Stieglitz, who was a pioneer in developing photography into an art and an exhibitor of modern art at his gallery 291. Upon seeing O'Keeffe's work, Stieglitz said that they were the, quote, purest, finest, sincerest things that had entered 291 in a long while, unquote. That spring, he exhibited 10 of her charcoals without telling her. She went to him and objected, saying they were personal, private, mine. But he overruled her. The rest, you could say, is history. Stieglitz opened O'Keeffe's first one-person show in April 1917. At his invitation, she moved to New York in June 1918. They became lovers. In July 1918, O'Keeffe accepted Stieglitz's offer to underwrite a year of her painting, and she resigned from teaching at West Texas Normal College. Stieglitz began photographing O'Keeffe in earnest. On December 11, 1924, following his divorce from Emmeline Obermeyer, they married. Stieglitz became her promoter and champion, and she became a prolific painter, providing new work for Stieglitz to exhibit each year from 1923 until his death in 1946. In her autobiography, O'Keeffe wrote of what she began thinking in 1915, saying, quote, I have things in my head that are not like what anyone has taught me, shapes and ideas so near to me, so natural to my way of being and thinking that it hasn't occurred to me to put them down, unquote. And so, She used her artist eyes to bring them out from within and paint what was true within her. Among the shapes O'Keeffe saw in her head was Blue 2, painted in 1916. It's a watercolor on paper. Emboldened to do her own thing, she created abstract expressions of what she felt and saw in her head. Critics in the 1920s, and then again quite prominently in the 1970s, saw the circular motions of Blue 2 to be representations of a woman's vagina. Since she was playing the violin at the time, others thought that the spiral was the scroll she saw at the top of the violin's neck. But O'Keeffe did not try to explain what she saw with words. She felt the painting, as with all her paintings, spoke for itself by portraying what she imagined, an infolding scroll that ranged in colors from light blue to almost black. Feeling free to explore her feelings, she painted number 21, also in 1916. It is an oil on board of the Palo Duro Canyon near Canyon, Texas. And it's one of several representational depictions of what she experienced there. Writing about going there with her sister Claudia, she says, "It was colorful. The only paths were narrow, winding cow paths. There were sharp, high edges between long, soft earth banks, so steep that you couldn't see the bottom. It was a lone place. Those perilous climbs were frightening, but it was wonderful, wonderful to me." O'Keeffe trekked the outdoors wherever she went, and in this rendering of the canyon, she portrays her intense feelings of fear and wonder in the abstract circles, the curves, and the striking colors of red, yellow, blue, black, and orange. Continuing on her quest into her own, she discovered from sitting in on one of Beeman's classes that she could visualize music. And thus in 1918, she painted Music, Pink and Blue, number 2, an oil on canvas abstract of what she heard. Giorgio played not only the violin, but also the piano. And so she was elated over, as she said, quote, "the idea that music could be translated into something for the eye," unquote. Critics, however, saw more than music. In the undulating forms and colors of pink and blue, they saw expressions of feminine genitalia and Freudian desires. O'Keeffe was surprised. She was embarrassed. She was angered by reviews that associated her art with a woman's sex and desire for sexual relations. After reading fellow artist Marston Hartley's 1920 essay in which he wrote of her work in Freudian terms, she said, quote, "I almost wept. I thought I would never be able to face the world again," unquote. Paul Rosenfeld infuriated her and made her feel, quote, "invaded," unquote, when he wrote in the 1921 December issue of The Dial, "Her art is gloriously female. Her great painful and ecstatic climaxes make us at least know something the man always wanted to know. All is ecstasy here, ecstasy of pain as well as ecstasy of fulfillment. In her, the ice of polar regions and the heat of tropical spring tides meet and mingle." O'Keeffe defended herself, saying, "When people read erotic symbols into my paintings, they're really talking about their own affairs." Her objections, however, may have suffered, because Stiglitz included nude photographs of her in his 1921 retrospective exhibition, said that, quote, whenever she looked at the proofs, she fell in love with herself, or rather, herselves. And she said of them, quote, "It has helped me to say what I want to say in paint." Seeking refuge from those reviews, she started painting more realistic paintings and turned her artist eyes to flowers. A flower, she said, quote, "When you take a flower in your hand and really look at it, it's your world for the moment. I want to give that world to someone else," unquote. But recognizing that a flower can be overlooked, she also said, quote, "I'll paint what I see, what the flower is to me, but I'll paint it big, and they will be surprised into taking time to look at it." Bigger than she made them. Her petunias, painted in 1925. It's 18 by 30 inches. It's an oil on hardboard panel with flowers of varying tones of purple before a blue and gray sky. Yellow Calla, painted in 1926, is only 9 1/8 and 12 1/4 inches. It's an oil on fiberboard with a yellow spathe and spadix on a white and gray background. With shades of white and gray petals, green leaves and blue sky, O'Keeffe's Jimson Weed, that she painted in 1936, is an oil on linen that is 70 by 83 1/2 inches, and it's at the Indianapolis Museum of Art. O'Keeffe painted her subjects many times over and sometimes in a series. Such was the case with a Jack in the Pulpit, which she painted 6 times at Lake George in New York in 1930. She maintained, quote, "Nothing is less real than realism. Details are confusing. It is only by selection, by elimination, by emphasis that we get at the real meaning of things," unquote. So in the Jack in the Pulpit numbers 2, 4, and 6, you can see the flower reduced from a somewhat realistic rendering to an abstract one, and then to only the spadix in white, the Jack, with touches of blue and dark red on a brown background, leaving little if any trace of a flower. Painting flowers, however, did not give O'Keeffe reprieve from reviewers seeing abstract representations of genitalia in her work. In Lewis Mumford's book, The Brown Decades, he said that O'Keeffe was, quote, "the poet of womanhood in all its phases. Without painting a single nude, without showing a part of the human body, she had magnificently embodied passion, sexual life, womanhood, as physical elements and as states of mind," unquote. Henry McBride may have rightly pegged her almost a decade earlier, in February 4, 1923, the edition of the New York Herald, by writing she is, quote, "unafraid," unquote, and then saying, "The result is calmness." Indefinitely unbosoming her soul, she not only finds her own release, but advances the cause of art in her country. O'Keeffe may have appeared unafraid and calm, but that's because she worked at mustering up her determination and courage. Before a public showing of her work, she determined for herself, quote, "how good or bad or indifferent," unquote, it is, to free herself of what others said. She claimed to not read reviews very often because she felt the sexual interpretations trivialized her art and ignored what she was saying. And by comparing a male's artist's paintings of flowers to a woman's, she argued that a male's was, quote, not confined to one phase of life, unquote, like a woman's was. Exasperated, she simply said, "You write about my flower as if I think and see what you think and see of the flower. And I don't." For what it's worth, what I see in O'Keeffe's Jack in the Pulpit, number 6, is a shepherd's staff that is used by shepherds to tend their flocks and is symbolic of the clergy's calling to tend theirs. Michael Gold, editor of the magazine New Masses, debated O'Keeffe in 1930 on the social relevance of her work, claiming she was ignoring the plight of the poor and the working class. She responded by asking, quote, "When you name the oppressed, do you include women?" Unquote. To this he said, quote, "Only working class women," unquote. To which she said, quote, "I am trying with all my skill to do painting that is all of women as well as all of me," unquote, thus pointing out her efforts to fight against gender inequality. O'Keeffe was a member of the National Woman's Party, and she wrote an endorsement for it in 1942 that said that, quote, "Women have always been treated as Negroes in this country," unquote. She lamented that more women did not work to become independent of men by developing their skills and earning their own living. Still, she refused to be labeled a feminist because she wanted to be recognized not as a female artist, but as an artist, an artist. And she thought that the quality of an artist's work suffered if created to appeal to a given group. O'Keeffe wrote, quote, "I find that I have printed my life, things happening in my life, without knowing it," unquote. In the book Georgia O'Keeffe Museum Collections, O'Keeffe's work is divided into abstractions, sculpture, architecture, animal and human forms, natural and still life forms, landscapes, and trees. We've already touched on the things happening in her life by looking at abstractions and flowers, so let's now touch on some of those other things. She turned to sculpture only 3 times. The first to commemorate her mother in 1916, and the last in 1982, when her eyesight was failing, and Juan Hamilton encouraged her to make pottery. She said of her efforts, quote, "I cannot yet make the clay speak, so I must keep on," unquote. And keeping on, her last sculpture became the last major work of her career. O'Keeffe painted very little of animal and human forms. Among those paintings is Nude Series number 9, painted in 1917. It's one of a series of nudes of herself. She also painted paintings like Three Women, 1918. Both of these that have just been shown are watercolor and graphite on paper. With architecture, O'Keeffe let the paint flow, and so in addition to New York skyscrapers, she painted barns, churches, crosses, houses, her studios, Ghost Ranch, and her home in Abiquiu. When she first went to northern New Mexico in 1929, she was struck by how often she saw crosses, and she compared them to the ones that she saw in Canada. Black Cross, 1929. It's an oil on canvas. It's of the Penitente cross. The black cross dominates, as you can see, the painting, as it stands before the gray, blue, and red-hot Cameron Hills. O'Keeffe said, "For me, painting the crosses was a way of painting the country." Comparing the Penitente crosses to the Canadian ones, she said, quote, "The Canadian crosses were singing in the sunlight. Always they had a feeling of gaiety, as if seen on, as you can see in her," Marilyn, we can move one step, go ahead one more, there. "As we can see in her oil on canvas, Cross by the Sea, Canada, painted in 1932. It has that slender brown cross surrounded by a white picket fence and before a blue sea and sky. And together I submit to you these paintings of the Black Cross and the Cross by the Sea are two pictures that depict for me and for some what they see in a cross, a symbol of suffering and hope, a symbol of injustice and deliverance. Obsessed with the patio wall and door at her Abiquiu house, she painted patio in black and with black door in 1955. It's an oil on canvas with the patio in adobe brown tones, the black door, and a blue sky. Painting just this fragment of the house seemed to express as well, and maybe even better for her, how she felt about this house that took her 13 years to make habitable. O'Keeffe owned two homes in northern New Mexico, one at Ghost Ranch and the other at Abiquiu. She settled there in 1949 following Stiglitz's death and lived there until her death on March 6, 1986 at age 98. Memorable of her works there are those of bones and sweeping landscapes. At the Indianapolis Museum of Art is her oil on canvas pelvis with distance painted in 1943. It's one of several pelvis paintings. It portrays an animal's pelvis before a narrow brown strip of flat ground, followed by blue mountains and white to blue shades of sky. Some see her paintings of bones and skulls as pictures of death, an obsession with death. But she saw in them a vibrant life that was, and a vibrant life that adds now to the landscape that she so adored. Also at the Indianapolis Museum of Art is Gray Hills, painted in 1941, of the Bisbee Badlands. In The Gray Hills, painted in 1942, she renders the hills in deeper hues than in her 1941 painting. She called the Badlands the Black Place. A little over 120 miles east of them is Peternel Mountain, which was for her, as the Welsh say, quote, "a place for the soul to find peace," unquote. She said of it, quote, "It's my private mountain. It belongs to me. God told me if I painted it enough, I could have it," unquote. My Front Yard Summer, 1941. Is an oil on canvas that portrays the Peternel, as she saw it in the summer from her Ghost Ranch house. Peternel, painted in 1945, is a pastel in which O'Keeffe tried, quote, "to find the feeling of infinity, unquote, using shades of blue and white and red and orange." And she saw this Peternel from her Ghost Ranch house. O'Keeffe tried, quote, to find the feeling of infinity, as I mentioned, using those shades. As she wanted, there was no funeral service for her, but the bells of Abiquiu rang when she died, and her ashes were scattered on the top of the Pedernal, that little flat piece on that blue mountain on the bottom of the picture. So what are we to make of Georgia O'Keeffe? Was she misunderstood? And if so, by whom? She was one who required solitude to absorb and process what her artist eyes saw. And she needed exceptional fortitude to be an artist in a male-dominated world. She found people's psychoanalysis of her and her work inappropriate and offensive because, in her view, they were foregoing what she saw for what they saw. And thus, she had a general disdain for the public, and she could show it. But is probing into her inner being inappropriate? And has she? Has she been misunderstood? In the Christian scriptures it says, quote, now we see in a mirror dimly the reflection of ourselves. Now I know in part, unquote. Have those who have looked at O'Keeffe's work, and O'Keeffe herself, seen in a mirror dimly and only in part what her artist eyes saw? Do we? If a case can be made for multiple understandings, can they complement one another? And if not, can what is not true be discarded for what is true? I think it's possible to see our sexuality in some of O'Keeffe's work, especially in her abstracts and flowers, even though O'Keeffe says she did not. But it's not sexuality as some of her critics saw and misunderstood it, sexuality in which she objected and by which she was embarrassed, sexuality in Freudian and obscene terms. For our human sexuality is not created to be domineering and controlling, forced, lewd, and shameful. Rather, it is part of the natural goodness of creation that can express endearment and provide pleasure for many, while also being vital for the continuance of the human race. It is this understanding of sexuality that I think can be seen in the imaginative beauty of O'Keeffe's paintings, her rich colors, formations, lines, and curves. O'Keeffe's art was, quote, intimate and beautiful, like beautiful children, unquote, to her. It was the children she wanted with Stieglitz but did not have. Though she certainly has been misunderstood, and maybe even by herself at times, I submit that if her art is seen as her intimate and beautiful children, as renditions of the whole of creation's goodness, from its most private to its most public manifestations, then multiple understandings are possible. And Georgia O'Keeffe can be more fully understood and appreciated for what she envisioned in herself and in the world. Thank you.